Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South, coming to you guys for a quick episode today. No Fawcett, just me. Alex Condon announces he is returning to Gainesville. Will play his junior season for the Gators. Condon, the All-SEC starter, All-SEC freshman team, and then last year an All-SEC selection. Started for the national champions. Averaged, had 12 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 steals in the national title game. It's hard. It's like, where do you start with a player of Condon's caliber? Let's just start with the national title game, where he got kind of barbecued by a lot of folks for the first half performance, and I thought was like tentative and not necessarily aggressive in that game, but ended up stuffing the stat sheet with 12 points, the 7 boards, the 4 steals, obviously the loose ball play that was like the most fitting ending ever, really, because that's, there was that video circulating around about Houston all week, and Condo ends up kind of out Houstoning Houston to win the national title and diving on the loose ball to secure Florida's 3rd national championship. Condon averaged an outstanding 12 points on the season, 13 points on the season, and he ranked at the top 100 in offensive rebounding percentage, the top 300 in defensive rebounding percentage, ranked in the top 200 in fouls drawn per 40 minutes, showing his ability to get and create contact. He also was one of Florida's most efficient offensive players, depending on whether you value, say, Bart Torvik or you value Ken Palm. He was either 2nd or 3rd on Florida in offensive efficiency. I've talked a little bit about Condon as kind of Florida's consummate glue guy, and I think that that's accurate. I think I can get into that. Like, he's not necessarily like a lot of people think, jack of all trades, 6-man type is the glue guy, or maybe the guy that's not afraid to play physical is the glue guy. And like, to me, Alex Condon is the glue guy because he doesn't have to like be the focal point to be dominant, right? Like, he was never on either of the teams that he's been an impact player on. He's never been the guy that like is relied on to carry the load. And sometimes that can be hard, right? Like, it can be hard knowing that you're a really talented player, and like, to grossly simplify things, that Walter Clayton Jr. is going to be your best player, or that Will Richard is going to be the guy that, ratchets up the defensive intensity at the right moment and hits the big 3, or that Elijah Martin is your best defender. Like, Condo is the guy who can do a little bit of everything. He can initiate offense in those horn sets. He is an elite passer. And showed that he not only is a good big-to-big passer, but can distribute as a big man in Florida's pick and roll. He's just multifaceted on both ends of the floor. The biggest distinction is, like, he starts every game. He had 35 starts last year, which was every game in which he was healthy and available, I think with the exception of one where he had just come back. He did not score at the level that, like, Walt, Elijah, or even Will Richards scored. Those guys were the offensive engines for Florida. But he's a bruising screen setter. He, again, is key to kind of that horns lick that Florida made so good. Entering the Sweet 16, he was 2nd on Florida and Bart Torvik adjust offensive efficiency behind Hauk and ahead of Walt. He does a lot of things to really help Florida win. And I think there's a couple little things that he's going to do better next year that also make him crucial. The first one is, like, Alex Condon is spectacular in transition. He's fast, which really, like, more than his physicality, is kind of where his, like, Aussie football background comes into play. I think it's like he could just get down the field. He could get down the court at an electric clip. I'm thinking about Aussie football. Like, there were times where he beat wings down the floor. And in fact, did so in the national title game on multiple occasions to get Florida really easy transition baskets that the Gators needed. Condon shot 79% on transition twos last season, which is among the top 10 in the country for a big. He also graded out as one of the top 10 big men in the country in transition per Synergy. He, I think, can improve as like a rim finisher, but, you know, he still shot 63.5% at the rim this season, which is very good. He's a great cutter. Something Jay Billis often pointed out that is unusual for a big man is like his ability to actually make hard cuts. He's an excellent diver. I think that there were a lot of times where he really would have been effective on short rolls last season, and Florida just wasn't really short rolling. And there were good reasons for that, right? They don't have to short roll as much when you got Walter Clinton Jr., but I think Florida will do that more with Savion Lee, who's tremendous in that kind of action. He obviously, you know, there's just a lot of ways that Alex Condon can score, and I haven't even gotten to his shooting yet. He cleans up on the offensive glass. You know, I wish that the worst aspect of his transition 2 game and his rim 2 game. You know, the worst part of his 2-point field goal game is putbacks. He was 47% on putbacks last season, which, like, let's look at his 2-point field goal numbers, which were 60.4% at the end of the year. And you see that transition 2 number that I already told you, it's 79%. So that means that, like, honestly, the biggest drag on his 2-point field goal percentage was putback twos, like those physical battles where you get the offensive rebound and you go back up. And I think that's something that he knows he can improve on, and heard in NBA feedback that he can improve on. His outstanding ability to track the ball as an offensive rebounder also makes him like a really good rebounder, even as he's gotten better from a technique standpoint. Now, like, you saw textbook box outs from Alex Condon on the defensive glass late in the season. We haven't necessarily seen a lot of them on the offensive glass yet. He's still just kind of a guy who has a real sense and knack for the ball and figures out where it is. And to post a 12.5 offensive rebounding rate, despite like some technique things he can clean up, is really outstanding with 2 offensive rebounds a game. And he's a great passer out of the caroms and out of offensive rebounds, where he got 40% of his assists. So I think he's just a terrific interior offensive player. And he also had that assist to turnover ratio of 1.5 to 1, with a turnover percentage that entering the NCAA tournament was 12, and it ended at 14, which showed you that, like, yeah, he struggled sometime with turnovers in the NCAA tournament. And another thing Condon has said they talked to him a lot about at NBA camps was, like, you need to turn over the ball less. You just need to be better than that. Like, you know, I'm not saying that he's kind of a guy who constantly is initiating offense. Like, we're not talking about Domantas Sabonis here, but we are talking about, like, a guy who has enough vision on his passes to be pretty effective. And he has that size advantage to see over a defense. So I don't think Florida's going to, like, get away too much from having him initiate some. And Todd Golden pushed back, because I kind of asked about that. I was like, hey, Todd, and I'll get some of that audio up, but you can see it at FloridaGators.com. And I asked Golden, like, hey, all right, with the 2 guards, are you guys going to use those guys to initiate more? And Todd was kind of like, well, yes and no. Like, we kind of like what we're doing. And I think a lot of that is that Condon is really well suited to keeping an offense flowing and to running offense through him. So that stuff's really important before you get to, like, his shooting. And, like, here's the thing. He has shot 35% or 34.5% from 3. And, like, I think he can get better, right? Like, so I've already said, I think he can get better at putback twos. I think he can get better from a turnover percentage perspective. Like, I think he can, you know, hit more of his 2-point attempts as a roll man. I think if they short roll him more, he will, but he shot 54% in 2-point attempts as a roll man in screening situations per Synergy. I think he can do better than that and will with Savion Lee. But then, like, and his cutting, which I think is awesome at like getting to the dunker spot, like have him cut elsewhere on the floor, is something that Florida can do. But the reality is that this is a guy who shot like 34% from three on 34% from three on reasonable volume. He's a 33% career 3-point shooter. And I think that volume is going to tick up a tad as he heads into his final year of college. And he really shows that, like, hey, he's a pretty big time difference maker as a shooter. And like that pick and pop game is the next step for Florida offensively with two great drivers in Flan and Lee. But it's also the next big step for Condon. And he worked on sort of the dipping motion on his shot and some of the things that I think were a little problematic as from a technique standpoint. He worked on them all summer, and he talked to Jonathan Givony about that. He talked to a bunch of folks about like, hey, here's the things I'm working on. Here's what they're telling me I can do. So I do think like when you look at his turnovers, they're usually sort of an indecision and a lack of aggression, which like, honestly, like I'd rather have an aggressive turnover almost any time than somebody who just isn't quite aggressive enough and then misses a pass because he's not aggressive, or travels because he's off balance and his footwork is bad and he can't decide and he's kind of in between ideas. Like those are things that Alex can certainly work on. But if he becomes like a 35% or on higher volume, then like certain things we've seen him do, like pump fake, like drive the ball to the basket from the elbow, like all those things become more effective. And like in that situation, like the ceiling for Alex is extraordinary. And he kind of fits in to the mold of players who have really high offensive rebounding percentage, really high steals percentage, and have taken a lot of threes. And usually there's a big bump in their production year three, according to Bart Torvik, which tracks all these things. So I think you could kind of look at Condon as a guy who undoubtedly can improve. And he can do all that stuff, and that's just the offensive end. On the defensive end, like that's where Kondo is the best player that he can be already, to the extent that like there are things he can fix, but like his IQ defensively is so high. And that he's 7 foot. We saw at the combine he was 6'11" without shoes with the 7 foot wingspan. The lack of the wingspan might concern some people. I don't think it's that concerning because he's so mobile and he's so quick. And again, he's 6'11" without shoes, means he's 7 foot in shoes. Tremendous interior defender. Opponents shot just 41% at the basket against Condon, with Condon as the primary defender. That earned a very high grade at Synergy, was one of the best 10 in the country, one of the best, 10 in the SEC among big men. He had a 5.8% block percentage as a freshman, 5.5 as a sophomore. I think he's arguably the best weak side shot blocker in college basketball. But he's so imposing with his perfect verticality, which was praised by multiple coaches, and his kind of reach as a primary defender. That makes it hard because he's going to stay vertical. He's not done a great job at staying out of foul trouble, but he's also great in help, right? We know about his chase down blocks. We know about his ability to stay stuck to driving perimeter defenders away and getting those blocks because of his quickness that we mentioned. So he can guard farther out, which is pretty tremendous. And, he absorbs a lot of contact without fouling. Again, after fouling out of the NCAA tournament as a freshman, controversial foul out for sure, but he only averaged 2.3 fouls committed per game last season, despite serving as one of the anchors of Florida's defense. Just plays with great body control on that end. And as I mentioned, his box outs became a real asset for him. We saw multiple perfect box outs by Kondo in the final few minutes of the NCAA tournament, national title win over Houston. So I think Alex is, obviously already one of the best defenders that Florida has. He's a good perimeter defender too. has active hands, very disciplined, has the great quickness, plays in a good stance, makes him hard to drive by, and his hips are fluid enough, even if he gets beat, that he can whip around and get after it with his length. So all of those things are super positive, and all things that Florida really needed back, quite honestly. And he was the last domino, I think, for Florida to compete as a Final Four team. It's a Final Four roster now. Does not mean Florida will make the Final Four. Does not mean that they'll even get past the Sweet 16. It is really hard to win in March. But I think when you look at the 6-7 best teams in the country, Florida's roster is every bit as good as almost all those. And it's just a question of like chemistry pieces in the backcourt. We don't know how Lee and Flan are going to play together yet. We know that the staff thinks they're going to play together great, and the idea is great. I think Florida's going to be better in transition, largely because, and Walter Clinton would tell you this, Walter Clinton Jr. would tell you, like, hey, one thing that was hard for me in my adjustment to point guard was getting out, playing fast, and being a distributor on the break. Florida had turnovers between Elijah Martin, Will Richard, and Walter Clayton Jr. on the break sometimes that I think were frustrating to people. You're going to have less of those with Boogie Flan and Xavier Lee, just two guys that are plus passers. I think they get more out of Condon in that regard. And that helps him too, helps Florida a lot in that respect. So I think Florida's transition offense improves immensely this season. And maybe that offsets some of the crazy shot making that Walt had. Although Xavier Lee is a great shot maker, not Walter Clayton, but a guy that is a good shot maker with a big bag. Boogie Flan is a shot maker. Again, not Walter Clayton Jr. Nobody is. Florida's not replacing that backcourt, but they are returning all four pieces of what Rick Barnes thought was the best front court in America last year. I think without question, the best front court in the country this season coming up with Condon. Chinyalu also opting to return after testing the NBA draft waters. Micah Handlockton, who we get for a full year healthy. And I think we could see some real improvements from Micah in terms of his ability to score. Now, he was a guy who was above 50% on his putback twos, right? And he needs to stay that way. But can Micah offer, the occasional post bucket? Not saying that they're going to play feed the post to Micah Handlockton, but another wrinkle that he could have as Florida's second center. And then obviously Tommy Houck, who I think is going to play plenty of the four, especially as Florida tries to kind of figure out who they are defensively and whether Tommy Houck is quick enough to guard, some of the jitterbug wing threes of Tega Oways of the world. And if he's not, he'll be back in that four. And then the pressure will be on a guy like CJ Ingram, a 6'6" freshman, or I think more in November, December, Zay Brown, and like, are they up to that task? But with Condon, it just makes all of that so much easier because Florida has just the most spectacular last line of defense in the sport, in my view. And I think in the view of a lot of people. And so now, you're getting into this situation with the Gators where, as I said previously, when we were waiting on Condon, could they check every domino and box? Keeping in mind that they were the last to start, right? They were the last to start putting their roster together because of the national title. They were even later than Houston because Houston could go home. And even though they were heartbroken and crushed, like there weren't victory celebrations, there was none of that. So immediately upon return, Houston was like, all right, let's get in the portal. Let's figure things out. And Mila Susan came back today. I think Houston is a top 3, top 4 team with an outstanding freshman class coming in. So Todd Golden, Jonathan Sapphire, Carlin Hartman, the 3 primary roster builders here, they had less time than everyone. And then 4 days before the portal deadline on entry, Denzel Aberdeen pops into the portal, heads and ultimately heads up to Kentucky. So not only did they have to replace Elijah Martin and Will Richard and Walter Clinton Jr., the greatest player in program history, they then had to replace an expected starting guard. And all the Gators have done is gone out and gotten the best combo guard in the portal in Boogie Flan, Xavier Lee, who set the all-time assist record at Princeton, where they ran an offense that's named after them that's all about making the extra pass and assisting baskets. And I know there's a lot of, Xavier Lee's game won't translate. That's fine. Just remember that if you're going to make those criticisms, at least make them fair and say, hey, the Ivy League is a better league than the MAAC, where Walt Clayton came from, in Iona. It's a better league than Belmont's league, where Will Richard came from. So, it's a better league than the league Dalton Connect came from. It's a better league than the league Chaz Lanier came from. So let's at least make the criticism fair. If you're just going to say, hey, a guy can't make the jump, let's make it fair. All right. And we'll see. Maybe if that fails, does Florida have a problem? I don't know. I mean, they still have Boogie Fland is the point. And so if they still have Boogie Fland in that scenario, you've got Urban Klavzar, you've got whatever you get from Xavier Lee, which won't be a 0. And then you've got Alex Lloyd, you've got Zay Brown, who Carlin Hartman swears is about to bust through. And that's the backcourt roster build, even if AJ Brown doesn't recover necessarily from surgery. And if he does, he's a 38% 3-point shooter who can knock down a shot in the corner for you and help you space the floor. So we're talking Todd Golden as a roster builder. And then what's the Trilly Donovan, burner ball comment? Sometimes it's the pieces you retain. Well, Florida went out and retained all 4 pieces of the best front court in the country. So from player retention to roster management, I think the Gators nailed it. And then again, it's just an analytically smart offense or smart roster build, because you have these guys who can make the shots off the dribble, who can shoot jump shots, who are good spot up shooters in Lee and Fland. But given how heavily those guys do rely on jump shooting, obviously I think Fland will finish better at the basket. Fawcett does too. We've talked about that. They also added a guy who can really feed bigs in the pick and roll to make Tommy and Alex more effective in the pick and roll. Then they have that front court, which is going to be top 10 in the country in offensive rebounding, maybe even better. So they're going to get misses back. That makes jump shooters more efficient. That's not a luxury that they had. Either of those guys had at Princeton or Arkansas last year. It's just not. So dominant offensive rebounders makes those players better. And then I think the part we're not talking about is just how much better Florida's going to be in transition. I think Walter Clayton Jr. would tell you that that's an area of his game that he could get better at. Last year, Will Richard had some turnovers that made you shake your head. I think transition basketball with Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee, Florida's going to get more easy baskets running with Condo, with Hauk. I think Micah Hanlockton as a rim runner runs the floor better than people think. I am very high on Florida's ability to get efficient transition offense going next season. So are we talking about Todd Golden as one of the best roster builders in America right now? We should be. We really should be. And it's year 4, and last year's team has the underdog legacy, as Elijah Martin put it. And Walter Clayton's going to be a first-round draft pick. That wasn't certainly expected before the season last year. Again, the talk was, they're moving to Walter Clayton to point guard. I don't know if Florida really has a point guard. Is that going to work? Well, it worked fine. They won the national championship. But I think, you're now looking at Todd Golden, who took over a team that had one surefire pro, Colin Castleton. Everybody knew he was going to at least get a 2-way shot, right? And Florida made him better. And then Florida ends up with Alex Fudge getting that 2-way shot, cup of coffee. Zion Pullen gets a 2-way shot the next season, right? And now you're going to have a first-round pick. You're going to have Will Richard, certainly getting probably a G League, 2-league look. Elijah Martin should be a second-round pick. He's now in the majority of the mocks. I think he's in a consensus mock at 57, 58. Even if he's not drafted, definitely going to get a two-way look. And so you're talking about multiple guys now that Florida has gotten looks, and now they've upgraded talent, right? Now, year 4, even though they're going to lose the chemistry of those guards, the best backcourt maybe in Florida basketball history, certainly, argument that it is easily the best backcourt in Florida basketball history. It was the best backcourt in America last year. And yet, Florida now adds a potential first-round draft pick in Boogie Flan to that backcourt. Tommy Houck is going to be a projected first-round draft pick. Alex Condon going to be a projected first-round draft pick. Florida's going to have 3 projected first-round draft picks on their team next year, and I think as many as 5 potential NBA draft choices, like C.J. Ingram and Alex Lloyd, certainly profile as guys who could be taken in the NBA draft at some point in their careers. And if that undersells the number, and the number is actually higher than 5, then I apologize, but I'm gonna stick at the conservative test of 5 and say they've now built a roster in year 4 to defend their national title with as many as 5 NBA players on it. And I think with immense room to improve. And these were every single one of them, Todd Golden, Jonathan Safire evaluations and UF staff evaluations, right? And yeah, somebody said Xavier Lee. Yeah, like Xavier Lee, potential NBA guy too. Could be 6. We'll see how's Xavier's NBA future ultimately really just depends on what happens next year. But, outside of Colin Castleton, who Mike White brought to the program, every single one I referenced, Golden and Safire eval. Golden and Safire instrumental in getting them to the program. So, it's pretty remarkable to be in a position where you're defending a national title and at least arguably you have upgraded talent, at least arguably. Now, the caveat, of course, is the chemistry has to work. That backcourt has to gel together. And then, you actually have to be able to replace a program icon by committee. But it can be done. And remember, just having that front court return is so, I think, super instrumental to that. And, the reason I would kind of make that argument is really just looking at UConn and their 2023 title team, right? So Sanogo, is there, but Sanogo's gone after they win that title. Well, they still had Donovan Clingan coming back, right? They still had Alex Caravan coming back. So they knew that there were going to be front core pieces that were there, and Samson Johnson ready to play a bigger role, like Micah Hanlockton, right? But they come back the next season, and you get Tristan Newton, and he steps up, becomes one of the best players in America. And then they added top 50 freshmen to the mix in Stefan Castle. Then they went out and got a portal player who was just lethal in Cam Spencer and came there to win, right? Which is all Boogie Flan has ever done before Arkansas. And you see what I'm saying? So the centerpiece of what Hurley was able to do was that backcourt. And then just knowing that he had one guy who could be that dude at guard. And it was Tristan Newton. And then they got the best out of Stefan Castle late. And then Cam Spencer came in and really just bought in culturally and then made shots. Right. And so I think Florida has the formula here. And we'll see if it works. I got a question in the YouTube chat. Do you think Olivier will ever play? I mean, right now, no, but who knows? We'll see what happens. That's probably a 2026, 2027 question when Florida really does have an overhaul rebuild, and the pressure will be on how much development occurs at Florida with guys like Lloyd and Ingram. And I think the answer to those things is positive, but this is a roster building exercise in 2025, 26. And the Gators have really passed that test with flying colors, and done it in a shorter window than everybody else in America has. So Florida, I think, poised to challenge and do something that they didn't do last year, which is win the SEC. And I know everybody in the world would rightly trade winning the national title in the Final Four and the SEC tournament for the SEC regular season championship. But I think Florida will be gunning for that league crown. It's been a long time in Gainesville, over a decade, since Florida won the regular season SEC championship. You got to have goals. And I think, you add in the pieces that they added along with the pieces they retained. I didn't mention Zay Brown. Another guy, I mentioned him earlier, actually, has said Carlin Hartman thinks he's going to break through. But Florida retained everyone they wanted to retain. And they added the people they wanted to add. They wanted to add Xavion Lee. They wanted to add Boogie Flan, and they got him. They didn't want to add Desmond Claude, so they passed. And were they in a tough spot? Not really. I mean, it was uncomfortable, I'm sure, to everybody, but the staff believed in what they were doing, and they went out and got their guy in Boogie. And now, again, they felt confident, as we reported at Florida Basketball Hour, throughout the process that Alex Condon would return. There were a lot of people who doubted that, who said, I think Condo's gone, especially early second round. He was going to get some sort of guaranteed contract. The question was, when would he get that? And what would the money be? And the reality was that it was never going to be the guarantee that he wanted in the first round. And it wasn't going to equal his NIL situation in Florida. And so Alex made the right decision, and the staff had confidence in that, which is why, even though they moved in the background to make sure that they had some sort of contingency plan, they didn't pursue any of the huge front court names in the portal because they felt confident that in the end, Alex Condon returned, and now he did. So all that's left to do is go out and compete. And this staff and this program right now has shown they're very comfortable getting out and competing. Go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts. Subscribe to our Patreon for more video, film studies, things like that. We're going to have something on Condon up tomorrow. Patreon.com/Florida BB Hour. Make sure you subscribe and support us. Again, we are Patreon driven. These podcasts that we drop for free, we've done for several years, and eventually that just kind of becomes non-sustainable. So if you want Florida basketball coverage that's unique to anything you're going to get elsewhere, please consider supporting the Patreon. Multiple ways to become a member, 3 different levels and tiers. It is worth it. I promise. Ask our subscribers, and also pound like on that. You know what to do if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Drop us a review on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere you listen where they allow reviews. We would really appreciate that. So thank you guys. And we'll be back soon.